Writing from the regional capital of Attar, French administrator Commandant Bosquet penned the book Notes on Sorcery in 1936 after his region struggled with a series of vampire-type attacks and subsequent retaliatory violence from local vampire slayers. Commandant Bosquet, who was based in Chinguitti, wrote that he witnessed several cases of vampirism when stationed there. Here he encountered a number of emaciated victims who had significant amounts of their blood drained from their body before succumbing to their condition. Villagers blamed their death on these vampire witches. In his report, he states that those who fell prey to blood-sucking were left near death in the Sahara where their family members found them. In September 1930, a French administrator based in the northwest African nation of Mauritania noted a disturbing incident in his monthly report. Here, he stated that a woman was attacked by a local mob after being accused of vampirism. The report stated that villagers believed that she was a supernatural entity who had anomalously extracted the heart out of the body of another woman and eaten it. This incident is just one of several that has occurred in various parts of North Africa over the past 90 years, indicating that a form of vampirism practiced under the guise of black magic and folklore continues to take place in the region. The high strangeness does not end there, because in addition to humans, there have also been encounters with strange humanoid creatures that have a taste for blood and a desire to feed off the local population. Vampires and vampirism have long existed in the various folklores of the wider Middle East and North African region, predating the arrival of Islam and Christianity. The first creatures that fit the modern description of vampires appear in the writings from the northern parts of the Gulf, in texts from Assyria in the north and the Akkadian and Babylonian empires in the south, as well as in documents of the earliest known Mesopotamian civilization, Sumer. The Assyrians in particular had adopted beliefs from their Sumerian predecessors, including belief in two classes of demons with vampire-like tendencies, the Ikimu and the Utuku. The Ikimu were the angry spirits of persons dead but unburied, prowling the earth until they found rest beneath the ground. An Utuku was sometimes hard to distinguish from the Ikimu, but generally it was the spirit of a deceased person who had been buried but forgotten. As a result, the Utuku returns from the underworld to haunt whomever it encounters, seeking sustenance from its victims. The Greeks, on the other hand, had developed their own version of the Mesopotamian vampire demon called the Lamia. Named for a demon born in Libya who terrorized Europe, the Lamia had the face and upper body of a woman and the tail of a serpent. Lamias could disguise themselves as human women. They devoured children and drained the life force from men. The idea that vampires are primarily women appears to be tied to the concept that most practitioners of magic are also women. For example, in Jewish folklore, creatures known as the Istri are spoken of. These are vampires that typically take the form of women. Like a jinn, it is said that they can turn into animals, and like a ghoul, it primarily targets men and children, feeding off their blood to survive. Istris were believed to be able to walk into holy places like synagogues and churches, and even seek prayer for healing. Some academics explain that vampires or ghouls in Middle Eastern lores are just the fictional embodiment of social and cultural anxieties surrounding death, graveyards, and of course, women, cultural taboos that are not healthily addressed in everyday life. This takes us back to Mauritania in northwest Africa. In the opening case study, we introduced the incident where a woman was accused of eating the heart of another woman before being captured by irate villagers. The link between vampirism and witchcraft is the most apparent here in early and mid-20th century Mauritania, where this instance is just one of many paranormal anomalous instances that have been recorded. Here, women, who are called Sellala, which translated to English means bloodsucker or vampire, have been practicing remote vampirism, assaulting their victims without even having to be in direct contact with them, sometimes extracting their organs without the victim knowing until it was too late. Exactly how the process is meant to take place is unclear. However, instances of its occurrence have been noted in several academic papers. Writing in the Journal of African History in 2016, the historian Erin Pettigrew from New York University, Abu Dhabi, notes several disturbing instances of these anomalous assaults. She writes of an oral account where a Sellala outside of the ancient Mauritanian city of Shingiti had convinced her victim to take part in a ritual. Holding one end of a string, she told her victim to sit across from her with the other end. When the Sellala began twisting the string over and over again, blood dripped down from the center, falling to the sand underneath. The blood trickled from an invisible wound, terrifying the victim. While the Sellala, or bloodsucker, never physically touched her victim, the string was pulled out between them, allowing her to slowly draw out the woman's blood to collect and seep down the fiber. Variations of this process has been recorded, with victims falling foul to apparent vampire encounters across the country during the 1930s. Before independence, Mauritania was part of French West Africa from 1920 as a protectorate and then as a colony. Writing from the regional capital of Attar, French administrator Commandant Bosquet penned the book Notes on Sorcery in 1936 after his region struggled with a series of vampire-type attacks and subsequent retaliatory violence from local vampire slayers. Commandant Bosquet, who was based in Shingiti, wrote that he witnessed several cases of vampirism when stationed there. Here he encountered a number of emaciated victims who had significant amounts of their blood drained from their body before succumbing to their condition. Villagers blamed their death on these vampire witches. In his report, he states that those who fell prey to blood-sucking were left near death in the Sahara where their family members found them. A decade later, Lieutenant Francois Bisley, serving in Shingit from 1945, he explained that the Moors claim there are a number of people gifted with a magical power who kill their victims from a distance by drinking their blood. Inevitably, this led to paranoia within the communities where these instances had taken place, leading to both guilty and innocent people being accused of being vampires. Unfortunately, this meant that instead of authorities dealing with these suspected remote vampires, vigilante mobs would take the law into their own hands, capturing and executing those accused of being bloodsuckers. Colonial reports of vampire incidents across Mauritania point to the clustering of such episodes in oasis towns. Aoujift, east of Attar, appears most prominently in these reports, as well as neighboring villages of Tungad and Mherith. These three Saharan communities were known for a high incidence of vampirism and for the presence of jinn. For a sociological explanation for why certain communities were often targeted as suspected vampires, Erin Pettigrew states that in the precarious environment of the Saharan desert, blood was seen as a coveted, life-sustaining commodity for the hungry and socially marginalized. As early as the late 18th century, blood-sucking appeared in locally produced legal texts of prominent Sufi experts in the esoteric sciences. She states that during periods of drought and in the context of longer local tensions between trading confederations, the accusation was leveled against the weakest members of a community. which were normally slaves or former slaves originating from sub-Saharan Africa, therefore recontextualizing these vampire attacks along racial and cultural lines. This is not a new concept in Africa when it comes to race and supernatural beings. In an earlier episode where we looked at cases of lycanthropy, we noted that in Ethiopia, where werewolf attacks have been reported to have taken place, specific minority communities were targeted as the source of these supernatural attacks, with Ethiopians of Jewish heritage often accused of being dog shape-shifters or Buddha. Originally from Morocco, most Buddhas were rumored to be blacksmiths by trade, and they labor in their forges to make amulets and charms of enchanted metals that will enhance their own inherent preternatural strengths. With the legends of Buddha, we find the myths of an Ethiopian vampire bat or death bird that is said to feed on the blood of animals and humans. Unlike the cases of remote vampirism in Mauritania, the Ethiopian death bird falls firmly into the realm of cryptozoology. While the cases of human vampirism can be rationalized away as merely a sociological phenomenon where regular humans were being accused of being supernatural monsters due to cultural differences, there is nothing human about the death bird. It was during an archaeological expedition to Ethiopia, then Abyssinia, during the early 1930s, that Hungarian-American amateur archaeologist and anthropologist Count Biron Kuhn Duprorok first learned of a place called the Devil's Cave where these creatures were said to exist. Documented in his travelogue, Dead Men Do Tell Tales, written in 1933, he states that while journeying through the province of Walaga, he learned about this secret cave. Here he encountered a huge cloud of bats that had made their home there. Unconvinced that these bats were dangerous, the villagers explained that night after night these bats came to drink the blood of anyone living near the cave until eventually their victims died. This was why the only people living there now were goat herds, who were forced to do so by the goats' owners. All of the herders there were virtually skeletal, and one was close to death, little more than a pile of bones scarcely held together by a shroud of skin. Duprorok writes that this living corpse of a man lay huddled in a cot with blood-stained rags and clothes on either side, and was so weakened by the nightly depredations of the visiting deathbears that he was unable to stand. The goat herds told Duprorok that the deathbirds settled upon their bodies while they were asleep, so softly that they did not even awake, and that they were sizable beasts with wingspans of 12 to 18 inches. Only 3 modern-day species of blood-drinking bat are currently known to science, and all 3 of these are confined exclusively to the Americas. Part 2 of this topic can be found on Patreon, where we leave the 1930s to look at modern-day accounts of vampirism in Turkey and contemporary Iraq, as a series of documented reports from both doctors and the military detail how scientists and researchers have been trying to get to grips with both humans and cryptids allegedly attacking and sometimes even taking the lives of other humans due to their insatiable hunger for blood.